call this, Molly is not going to be here.
No, that's it.
That's it?
Yeah, Greg's out there.
Okay. So we'll call this budget meeting to order for May 20th. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda with a late addition I see? Moved by Councillor Holland, seconded by Councillor Lang. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, motion's carried.
The late addition, there's the animal contract, the animal control potential contract.
So we'll add that as 10.
Yeah.
Right, and can I have a motion to adopt the minutes of April 15th, 2014? Moved by Councillor Lang. Seconded by Councillor Holland. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. All right. And then we'll move right into business and we'll get an update for Public Works.
We've received word from Okanagan Aggregate, who got the contract for the highways, to late June, tentative date at this point. He's actually going to be here tomorrow, late morning, to go over things that are shown, the fire department stuff, and what we want done, and look at the pit and a bunch of stuff. Tomorrow morning also we meet with the liquor store owner to try to resolve some issues there. He seems very receptive. I don't think there'll be any problems. So late June for that, curb and gutter mid-June, and I think that it's going to work out with Maglio to split the cost of the mobilization. We'll get them first, and then they'll get them. So on the 16th is what I'm hoping for the curb and gutter.
They being the regional district or the liquor store?
No, splitting the cost with Maglio Industries. They're doing Maglio Installations. They're doing work in Nelson.
It's the curb and gutter work.
Oh, okay. But okay, because they
So
come
it's
from
45
elsewhere, right?
They're coming from the Okanagan, and
Oh,
it's
I see.
$4,500 to get in here.
Oh, okay.
So if we can cut that in half, it helps. The fire hall, the hydrants in, and the service to the building will should start on tomorrow. Because we've got to get that all out of the way so that they can pave that area too. The airport, we did the rough leveling. We got rid of that berm. The grader was down for a while, so we haven't got it completely smoothed out, but that'll be going on soon. And then there's signs that we haven't gotten yet for
Yeah,
that.
not around here.
That have to go up there just prevent people, or try to prevent people from going off the airstrip. And there's also signs for the boat launch that are, there's one sign that's here and got up yet. Mayday's garbage was a bit of an issue. Other than that, I think it went pretty smooth as far as we were concerned anyway. Just a few problems with the truck and something got into the garbage at the playground and stuff, but all in all, pretty good. The sewer treatment plant, we did a lotting, like a session, 2 days, Paul and I, and it worked really well. We didn't get a tremendous amount out, but it did definitely run through the whole thing, like the lower part, and seemed to work good.
So that's the new thing that we just purchased, right, from Nelson?
That's right,
Yeah.
$2,000. And the machine runs really well. Unfortunately, we didn't get a lot, like great big lumps of grease out, so we didn't have to hire a suck truck to come in and get them. Paul was quite concerned that we were going to get this massive amount and then, just too much to try to pull out by hand, but it wasn't that much. So we now know that it's quite clear. So.
Just on the curb and gutter line before you go on, I'll need a figure within the next couple of days so that we have a council resolution on the 27th line the board for.
Sewer treatment plant also do pressing pretty soon here. either later this week or next. We have to get it out of the way because we have a lot of stuff coming up here. We had water smart here the other day, that Meredith Hampstead. They're thrilled with the amount that we cut, that leak that we found. It makes them look good. But we're going through about half the water that we normally do in winter. We didn't have to pump out of PRV1 though. Through the winter.
Who's handling the paving for the curling club?
I don't know anything about that.
Oh, don't you?
No.
Because my understanding was they wanted to pave the front of the curling club, that triangle.
Oh.
So,
well, they should. Yeah.
Brian's the president. But it'd be good to meet with.
I'll try to remind, talk to Brian.
Yeah, I can give him a call. That's not a problem. And
Yeah.
he should be getting together with you and the Okanagan guy to talk about it because it's a fairly big chunk. The issue, of course, is going to be drainage. It's going to have to be figured out where the water's going to run.
Yeah, because we're getting more and more pavement in that whole area now, with the fire department too. And yeah, there needs to be a bit of thought put into that.
Anyway, I'll call them and let them know that. But last I heard, I'm not on that board. So last I heard, they were planning on paving.
I should probably also, we should probably also send Okanagan Advocates information to Chief Swan for the fire department.
Well,
has that already been done?
sort of. Dan is running the show up there.
Yeah.
He's been in touch with me, and I left a message that Okanagan's coming tomorrow because he would like to be around when I show it to him.
Yeah.
So I let him know. He knows now when it's going to happen. So.
We've been fairly blunt that Public Works are too busy to do the site prep up there for that work. So I hope, I'm just anticipating the regional district to have that in hand.
One last thing on the curb and gutter. What we're going to have to do here within the next few days is move all those barriers in towards the street by about 8 feet or so that we can work on the outside of them to dig it down and get that all ready. Which is going to just mean parallel parking for the next 3 weeks.
So then I think we should, well, you've probably already done it, notify all the adjacent businesses so they don't have a big hairy fit when all of a sudden it happens and...
Well, now we've got dates, so we'll be able to get that right.
I did talk to Russell because he's usually the first one down there, and I wanted him to park the right way because
Right.
if the first person does it right, then the rest probably will.
They will follow suit, yes.
Yeah, as soon as I see it, I'll do the same.
Yeah.
So is this the final plan? Is this the plan we're using now? I've got a few people asking. It's confusion. Oh, it's actually the annual parking lot.
That's the old one?
Yeah, those are old ones, I know.
Yeah,
These are old ones.
Yeah.
I think we'll the other way. But it's very similar to this, just angled the other way.
So I think probably it would be a good idea to drag out these, because as soon as stuff starts happening down there, everybody's going to be all fired up again.
Yeah.
And if you get one step ahead of the rumor mill,
Oh, well, you never be ahead of them. Because I had somebody come in and ask me to
well, they're
be...
going to ask anybody, but why don't we make up a few, some 8.5 or 8.5 by 14s? And we could offer ask the businesses to stick them in their windows. I think that would help a lot. The people that easily can see quickly what's there instead of listening to everybody going on.
That'll still happen. I had somebody,
Yeah.
you know, there's a misconception about the street front, the bump out for the bakery. Like, is that actually happening? I heard, you know, somebody's going around saying that you're doing it this year. No, we're not doing it this summer. So, I'm going to have to add something to your list then. Oh, moving the sculpture, because it can't.
Right.
So,
I haven't actually seen it, so I don't know what it looks like.
oh, I can have my phone there. It's big. It's about the tree with the nest is about 7 feet tall, and the birds are about that big. I think there's a male and a female. So Brian is going to be down there. He's working on a 10-foot tall porcupine right now. So he'll be down there a few more days.
Okay.
So we'll have to go somewhere temporarily until a base can be engineered for it.
Well, if we feel that it can go on Water Street, then maybe we should just put it in the workshop until then.
Yeah.
I'd rather nothing happen to it in the meantime.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm simply suggesting Water Street because we don't actually have a centerpiece for all that work that's going to be done there. A lake and mountain backdrop for something that,
Oh, that would be
significant
fantastic.
would be nice.
If it turns out that it's just too big for those particular green spaces, I mean, possibly over here beside City Hall too is an option. Good. Work out once the fire hall's going.
Right.
Yeah, that could be a good spot.
Yeah.
Have we talked about that for that space? It's just going to be a green space?
No, basically, there's an expression of interest we were supposed to put out once it was cleared from the community for ideas. But if you have a centerpiece like that, if Water Street doesn't work out, you can essentially landscape around it.
Yeah. Is the plan to move the slab too?
Yes.
Remove the slab? So that's all set?
Well, it's not.
That's the plan.
Yes, that's what we.
Yeah, that'd be a pretty nice little space for it, next to the library if you want to do a book reading or whatever.
Just further to moving the sculpture, I've seen that, so I think you can move pretty easily with some forks, but you might want to pad them. But you had something to wrap around the forks, and then
We can find some. Yeah.
because it comes up like this. And
Yeah. It was a big burr. I should have brought my phone in. I could show you
Yeah.
pictures of it.
anyway,
Yep.
I'm sure you'll.
There's a couple of alternate locations that Len suggested. It's probably too big for the lobby of the arena or up at the golf course, because those are both municipally owned as well. So,
My biggest concern for that would be how's it going to survive the winters?
right.
Because winters are hard on wooden sculptures.
Yeah, I don't know what you do. You can't cover them, I don't think. Put them in
Not
the
very well.
The finish still has to be put on it because it was gotten wet so you didn't want to put a finish on it while it was still retaining the moisture. So you'll have to maybe go in the building, especially birds.
Maybe something that just requires a very, an annual or biannual regimen of refinishing.
I didn't have anything else.
Alright. So does anyone else have questions for Glenn before we let him go? Because I don't think there was anything else that we needed your input on that I can see. It's all regulatory and...
No, I have appraised Glenn of price brand of item 2 because it's something of interest to him.
Yes.
Having fun sometimes, but
It seems like a good idea. I don't know how much input I could have into it, but
Okay. You just agree with it. It's a good idea.
well, I do. Yeah, it has to just have to work out all that things.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. You take a swing down there. Ryan's still down in the car.
yeah, you should check out while he's there. It's huge.
Yeah, I'll do that tomorrow morning for sure. I don't
Yeah.
have the address.
Oh, okay. Yeah. He said he'd probably be down there 10 or 10:30. Because I don't know whether I think he puts the birds away in the sewer or this.
We can store him inside.
Yeah, but, Paul gave him the key.
Okay, man. Yeah, bye.
That's okay. All right, so the next item is discussion of a new reserve bylaw. There are actually several. It's all, which I don't know, have you had a chance to look? But they're all very good. I didn't read them in detail because we'd have to change stuff, but pretty close.
So this came out, just as a reminder, this is one thing, significant finding that came out of the auditor's management letter, where she was challenged with respect to tracking down all our reserves and working out which were statutory, which weren't, and so on and so forth. There's a number of fairly old bylaws, and a number of areas where there's a lack of clarity. There's probably a resolution somewhere many years ago where some were established, some weren't. So I had a look around and I had a chat with Barry Lehman as well on and off about this concept. And I'm just giving you an example from the corporation of Village of Truth, is a fairly similar sized municipality to ourselves. And what they did was essentially a bylaw where they consolidated all their reserve information under one bylaw, repealed all the others, and created some other reserves at the same time to plug certain gaps. And with policies around how you contribute to those reserves and how you remove funds from them. And it's one simple go-to place for easy reference in terms of how these reserves are supposed to operate, rather than looking all over the place. I'd certainly be keen to have something like that in place ahead of the new council.
We've had an equipment reserve, because I know we've had to, by resolution, move money out of that, but that's the only one that I'm really aware of. I always thought we had one for sewer and water, but apparently there's no actual policies or bylaws.
There's no bylaw covering it?
There's no sewer infrastructure reserve fund or anything like that. There is one dealing with for dealing with the debt, but that's distinct, and I think that's maybe where the confusion lies. We've got a lot of ground to make up on sewer, particularly when we're dealing with the waste management plan. Some other examples there, of course, in Montrose there are some utilities that we don't have here, so it wouldn't be creation of things like drainage and transportation, but you have already provided a resolution to create a parks one, for example, in the last little while, so that would go in there. Capital buildings, machinery and equipment reserve fund, formalising that to a greater degree would probably be quite useful. And also, in our case, there's the airport reserve, there's paving. Paving needs a little bit more protection than it has right now.
So here they call it transportation, we just adopt some of this stuff there.
Yes, we could put it in there. Yeah, we could
I assume that this bylaw has probably been vetted by their legal and, which is pretty cool.
No, I thought it was a fairly good model. There's a similar one used by larger municipalities as well. I had to look at the City of Victoria's one. It's structured very similarly to this.
I like the idea of having a community works fund reserve. Instead of those funds, I don't know where they sit now. This will make it a lot more plain and clear and transparent about what the heck's going on.
And how it can be spent, that it's not just willy-nilly.
Yeah, I like this a lot.
So actually, I don't see any of them that, like even the transportation one, it's for upgrading roads and paths and trails,
So, so would it be normal then for any unexpended funds at the end of the budget cycle to automatically be transferred into those reserves if they were?
It would depend on your financial situation. There's two ways you can contribute to the reserve. You plan a reserve contribution every year, which of course CFO would always recommend. And the other is that if you underspend in areas of the budget and you can afford to put the revenue into a particular reserve, you do that towards the end of the year.
so if we were on budget on all other items, they're there is no reason that that could not happen.
What should happen is around November we have a very close look at variances and make some determinations around that time. Of course, this year, just when the new council's coming, see if we put some monies aside at that time into reserves. But of course, globally, if you overspend in certain areas and you need that money from another area, we're not like a regional district where we're trapped. We can move it around.
So what would you like, a resolution or recommendation that we have you...
Have staff develop a consolidated municipal reserve file.
Councillor Lang, we'll have that motion. And seconded by Councillor Holland. Any discussion?
Just, I like the insurance contingency reserve fund too. We get an NIBC refund every year, right?
Yep.
Yes.
We should be throwing in general revenue.
No,
This is way overdue.
Well, and some of them, not even knowing that we, assuming that we've got, because we talk loosely about reserves and moving money into reserves, but didn't know that there wasn't a mechanism.
well, also, I need to give some further consideration to this myself. We take our payment in lieu of taxes issue. What should have been happening over those years was that amount that wasn't released for whatever reason was put into a reserve awaiting the date when the conditions were appropriate to pay that money. So there should be a reserve of a type. I don't know whether it would be one with a lot of protections on it particularly, but there should be a reserve for those kind of situations where if you're not sure whether to pay it, but you've got the money, you make sure it doesn't end up in general revenue. Get lost in the mix.
Very good.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. That would be good to have that in place. All right, so the next item is RDCK and City Hall.
Okay, well, the CAO for the regional district was up about 10 days ago to talk with me, along with the parks planner, about parks matters. But I bent his ear while he was up here on the subject of the library service. And now, those of you who were present at the regional district budget session, I kind of brought this up at the time. The library clearly doesn't have the funds to pay market level rent for the use of the City Hall basement. They pay about $1,000 a year. With the fire department leaving City Hall, at least for the time being, the operation and maintenance, electric, heating, and so on, will be the burden of the municipality 100%. And we'll soon see what the operational costs are. But my point is largely that there is no contribution from the regional district at this time with the service in place that goes into the maintenance and repair of City Hall, even though the library has been present there since the 1920s. It doesn't strike me as a particularly equitable situation. It shouldn't be construed. I think the Library Society should be paying lots more money themselves out of their own pockets. But I wanted Council to consider a direct appeal to the regional district for some additional requisition through that service to make a fair contribution to the repair and maintenance of City Hall for its use of the facilities.
Totally makes sense.
Even just kind of like a flat cost recovery plan.
If you look at the PDF I placed there, it's a little bit complicated. I was trying to find a way to put a comment on a PDF file. I put the RBC, if you look at the little yellow speech bubble there, I suggest, it's basically right there.
Oh, okay.
You just hover over it. No, it's not here.
No.
No, it must be a different system. The RDCK service 62622 provide a building operation and maintenance contribution of $10,000 annually adjusted to the Consumer Price Index every March from 2015 to the village of Kaslo. And it was in recognition of the true costs of Kaslo District Library sharing the City Hall building. Of course, my concern is the library may construe this as criticism of them, and I didn't really want that. It was simply we will have cost issues with City Hall, but we're doing.
Well, I'm only guessing that a way to approach this strategically would be to engage Director Shadrack pretty quick and let him know that there's an additional $10,000 requisition strictly for the building, not to do anything with the operations side, so it's not perceived that, because I mean, a couple of years down the road, they could start doing that, you know, maybe it's a separate, it's kind of separate, should maybe I don't know if it'd be written in here as building, should be identified separate from the whole budget.
Well, even cost recovery of
Yeah.
the utilities.
Cost
those
recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For some reason, yeah. No, I think Katie would kind of get it. Yeah.
Even if the regional district wanted to put some bells and whistles onto it, like we wanted to know what it went towards or whatever, that's not a big deal. We could probably easily sink 10,000 repair and maintenance into City Hall every year.
Yeah.
Well, as long as they don't want control. It just seems that whenever we get into something, they seem to want to take control.
Money.
Yeah, we'll give you the money, but you can't do what you want with it or what you need with it. We want to take control of your budget, and that, you know, the optics of getting into so many things with the regional district. There are many people who are opposed to the theory of the reality of the regional district, and that they're such a big entity, and there's, you know, fireball issues you know with stuff.
However, this is just this is a staff recommendation that you consider exploring this, because I perceive there to be a little bit of a problem there, and I'm sure the library doesn't have the resources to go beyond that $1,000 a year, but it costs a lot more than that to keep them there.
I wonder if instead of making a resolution tonight, that staff come up with the costs that we do normally have for that building, and you know, they'll be reduced somewhat by once the old fire hall is removed, but you know, even if we said 50-50 at this point between the two structures, like for the last 3 years or whatever, since we have the village offices have not been in there, that would give us an idea of just the utility costs, and gives us a basis to start with, and so we can, you know, because it's not going to happen immediately, but I think we should have the CAO speak, like you said, to Director Shadrack in the meantime, and say that we're like to at least start thinking about it.
Well, yeah, it's a 2015 budget issue, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, that's our deadline, and I think that sharing of the utilities is all that's really required. I don't think we need them to be involved in at any other level. Unless you've got ideas around the restoration of the building, but that would be a tough sell from a regional district perspective.
Well, I've left it towards repair and maintenance more generally, but because the library do have some space aspirations in that building, if they have a proposal, knowing that we're moving forward with projects over the next year or two, it might be an opportunity to hash that out if they're looking for additional space in the next on the next floor out.
And that could be done just simply by saying, well, if any additional space will cost you X. per square foot. So let us know how much you need.
Well, no, I appreciate it's a there's a commercial. I mean, we clearly can't go the route of the Campbell building and ask for something even close to market of the district library. However, because the service is there, there's the opportunity to go direct to the regional district and have that discussion without harming the library's operations.
Oh no, it shouldn't be impacting your operation, but it should be more of a realistic budget.
So are you happy with the direction to staff at this point?
Yes.
And we'll come back to a subsequent meeting. The next item is the proposed golf course trail. A couple of things I wondered about. Do we need to have any studies about slope stability and just have it actually outlined? Is that going to be an issue? We don't want to create any problems. You know, I think it's a good idea at some point to do that, because it would be good to have the kids have access rather than walking up the highway. And Councillor Lang?
Well, I was just going to say, it's highly unlikely very many of our clients would use the trail. The golf course would certainly have no objection. I think I can say that to having a trail constructed. Now that they've done the interface, you can sort of see that there are benches in there that could be developed to make it a reasonable walk rather than going straight up the side of it. My only concern would be, I guess, is how much is it going to get used versus how much is it going to cost.
Well, given the council's decision and last week's regular meeting that there are some funds left in the community development program, I mean, we're not talking a lot of money, but certainly more than Mr. McKinnon referred to.
Right. Councillor Holland?
I was just wondering if we should just, I mean, the Trailblazers have really kind of spearheaded our whole trail, and maybe just if they would have a comment, does this make sense for the trail systems around, or just if they have a comment, and who knows, maybe they even get involved or something. Maybe save some costs or something. I don't know. But it seems like the Trailblazers have kind of done an awesome job around here. Why not include them in this discussion? Why not ask if they got a comment on it?
I can refer Mr. McKinnon's suggestion to them.
Sure. Just see if it links up to the plans. Now, the trail where it actually comes down is staying well on village property. It's not getting close to the gate or any of that business on.
The new gate,
It doesn't look
the
like
controversial gate.
Yeah,
No, it's across. It's basically the slope below the clubhouse.
This
And
one,
it's sort of 45s.
that's all village land.
Yes.
That controversial gate's an in-camera item for the next week.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know whether the Trailblazers would be put in a position where they would have to get a machine in to do the work, because on the side hill like that, I don't think you're going to have people trying to break a trail. It's a machine.
Yeah, and they have mobilized machines for different parts didn't work good. I mean, I think they pay for it. I think there's a lot. There is handwork,
Yeah.
But does it make, to me, it's more, does it make sense? Like to Councilor Lang's point, is this something that's actually going to get used for these things, right? And I think I would trust their input on that. Oh yeah, because you're making that okay, stuff like that.
So just another direction to
Okay.
staff to refer
Sure.
that to Trailblazers for comment.
Sure.
All right, recycling program for next year.
Now, this is another 2015 item perspective. Just to give you some background on this. We were grandfathered into the MMBC program on the blue bag basis, which I have since determined that was done through a misunderstanding at their administrative levels in Vancouver. Technically we shouldn't have been allowed to do that, but we have been, and we're locked in as long as we're staying with blue bag for the next little while. However, while the regional district services are still in place with their blue bag, there's going to be quite a bit of confusion over the NMBC blue bag that's acceptable and the RDCK blue bag that goes in the recycling. Having talked with NMBC extensively about this, if we were to switch over to the recommended system, which is essentially a bin of loose recycling, they would want the community to switch over in one move rather than phase it in, because they would then have to deal with a mix of blue bags that are sealed and bin and loose material from the bins. So if council wishes to bring in the bins, you have to determine two things. One, whether you want to encourage residents to purchase their own bins, and we provide stickers for the bins to be clearly labelled as recycling. That's been done in other jurisdictions. But of course we won't get 100% uptake on that. The other is to purchase a block using New Deal funds of bins for residents. But we'd of course be talking several hundred here, so it would be a reasonable expense. It would probably run to close to $20,000 to do that, depending on the quality of bin. That's also been done in other communities. So it's one is a sort of participate. If you want to participate, get your own bin, and the other is we're going to provide a bin for you. Of course, we've no room this year to do that, but with New Deal funds, we certainly could. My only hesitancy on New Deal funds right now is that we still don't have any clarity on the new funds coming in and what they can be used for. They certainly won't take away anything, any of the uses from the past, but the demands on maybe more competitive. Prior to MMBC coming into the frame, purchasing recycling bins for residents would have been one of the top uses of gas tax money. It was one of the most common ones to get people recycling. But since this has moved to MMBC, doing that might be a little more controversial now. MMBC aren't providing enough funds for us to make that kind of acquisition, nor are they forcing us under this particular 3-year contract to convert from blue bag to bins. But I would anticipate, if we were to get an opportunity, if all went well in 3 years' time, that they would probably compel us at that point to move over to bins. So we could either plan for that or leave it alone. I'm just putting it out there that if you want to look at that as a 2015 budget item, that would be how you would deal with that.
Well, to me, in the recycling world, it makes quite a bit of sense to go to these. I know the plastic film is still garbage. They're just not doing anything with that. I'm wondering about, my first gut reaction to this was when I looked at this and went, wow, you're not going to be able to see contamination like you can in blue bag, but at the same time, since it's all loose, when they're dumping this out, it's actually going to be better. Because in the blue bag, it won't be. So this is, and if the guys are doing this and he comes across something he's supposed to be here, he just stops, puts it back.
Well, that's why MMBC say that they prefer the loose in the bins because the scope for contamination being missed is greater in a state blue bag.
Yeah, I would agree. So I think it's worth considering. I'd make a recommendation, let's go to 2015 budget. Or we recommend to council that we refer this to budget.
For that to budget. Okay, seconded by Councillor Lang. I think just as my comment as far as sizes is just to see what kind of use it gets in this first little bit to determine which size, because I can see there's 3 different sizes, so don't go with, you know, if we're not having that much, then don't go for the monster bin. That's going to be a little more difficult to handle.
I think at least for this initial period, we're going to struggle for volume. Fortunately, we're on a flat rate. The main problem being that if Brian leaves someone's recycling because it's contaminated or the wrong things are in there, all the resident is going to do is put it in the back of their car and take it down to the regional district depot where no one's watching or maintaining it, and no lesson will be learned. Until the regional district depot situation is sorted out, if it's sorted out, we'll be up against that from day one.
So, I guess the second part of this, I'd be, just to staff or whatever, inform Brian that we're looking to use a container like this, and ask him to make a recommendation. After picking this stuff up for a year, he's going to know what size it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So on the first motion, then to refer that to budget, we'll call the question. All those in favor, motion's carried. And does that one need to be a motion or just?
No, I just call it a I'll talk to him.
Then do you want this next one to be in camera? Should we?
Yes, sure.
Do we want to just move item number 6 to the end of the meeting?
Yes, just move it
to
to
go
the
into
end,
in camera. Okay. So when the next one should be fine to discuss.
Yes, I'm basically on item on that item. I'm just letting you know I'm drafting an annual report, trying to move us to a more commonly used format on that. I don't know how much time I'll have to make it particularly glitzy, but I'm ahead of the new council. I'm trying to establish the format for the annual report as well as the accounts, so that when we talk about strategic priorities and so on, that becomes part of that document, and that's a document that the public are commonly referred to and ask, well, what did you do last year? What do you plan to do the following year? Of course, by the time the annual report comes out, you're usually about halfway through what you're planning to do the following year.
Yeah.
But that's just the way the thing goes. But it's a good aid for council and staff to explain to the public what's going on, and I hopefully will be able to give it the time it deserves in the next little while. And also, if there's anything, if you have any burning things that you want to make sure are in the annual report, major or minor, let me know. Just going back on the recycling program, it might interest you to know that all in the last 2 weeks we have received so many standard operating guidelines and bits of paperwork relating to Brian's end of the activity in Castle that we've been waiting months for. It's been pretty frightening. He's handed us that. It's not really a lot, but it doesn't boil down to a great deal. But we've certainly not been behind the curve. They've been struggling to make their deadline to get the thing started.
And to do with the recycling startup, the first one is this Thursday, correct?
Yeah.
Can we get another little blitz out somehow with, reminding people that recycling starts this Thursday, and so he'll be on sort of the regular garbage pickup schedule. He'll probably be starting about 9 in the morning.
Yes, it's just as per the way he does it. It'll take time, but yes, we're putting the message out again.
Councillor Holman?
No, I have a cramp on my hand.
Oh, okay. No, that was a hand up. That was a hand up, but
That was a hand up.
not for attention.
Not for attention.
Okay. Item number 8, RDCK Service 142. That'll be something probably that Councillor Holland will want to comment on.
Sure. I've been, Director Shadrack has really been, this has been kind of a thorn in his side. He's never been too enthusiastic about this. And I believe council is basically interested. And I think there's lots of opportunities for it to be a very useful bylaw and service, very useful service, where we could actually tackle some issues for the community. And I think we're not out of the woods economically, and they're probably all the vehicles we've got as a local government to participate in and support businesses would be good. And this would be probably one of the main things that we can do. So I've been working on Andy. He's been working on me. Where we've kind of ended up is I think that council should strongly consider proposing some amendments, that we amend the bylaw rather than allowing if Area D director decides to withdraw, he's gone. But I think the director, if we would come up with some good amendments to clear up some of the language, because it's a little bit loose, that I think he would be quite tempted by that. So I would ask if Neil, with some of his background experience, could look at the bylaw and maybe make some recommendations that would allay some of, and I think you're probably aware of what Andy's concerns have been with the bylaw. If we could come up with some recommendations or some language to kind of tighten it up a little bit to his satisfaction, I would prefer that council take a position to enter into some negotiations on amending the bylaw rather than allowing Area D to just withdraw.
Did you have any comment?
I can certainly do that. I can also, often in regional district services, directors who don't like particular services will use something called a service review to try and collapse it from the inside. In this case, where we have zero requisition and no real money at stake and for many years, a service review, if funded in 2015 by the service, could take it out of Area D hands and also village hands directly to have a proper discussion about where that service should go as a negotiation between the electoral area and council. A service review would, if done formally, whether it's it doesn't have to be a statutory service review, but if funds were raised to cut to the chase and work out what would work for Area D and Kaslo, it would at least defer losing that service for a few more months and enable a proper negotiation to take place before it's lost, because once you lose that, it's very hard to get it back, extremely hard to get it back. So yeah, I can certainly do that, but I'd be keen if to suggest that if a short-term solution can't be found to make the changes, that council formally also request to the board of the regional district a service review. Would appeal to the board on that level.
Councillor Lane?
Yeah, I was led to believe that it was, if the village said no with collapsing the bylaw, that the regional district couldn't move forward. But I'm reading Andy's letter here. It says if it goes to a vote of the entire board, then perhaps they can take unilateral action, with whether or not we approve it or not. Would that be a correct statement?
Possibly, yeah. It's quite hard to. However, if council requests a service review rather than strictly opposing what the area director is doing, it becomes more of a political lobbying.
I understand that, and I'm thinking that may be our only option at this point in time.
To me, it doesn't quite seem fair that as a municipality, we would have to give 2 years notice that we want to withdraw from the service, but the regional district can tomorrow basically, if there was a meeting tomorrow and Director Shadrach brought that up and put it to a vote of the whole board, it could be gone, but we have to continue to pay for 2 years for a service that we no longer want. To me, that doesn't sound fair, because we do have to...
It depends on the provisions in different
In the
services.
service, that's not a provision in this
Whether it's
service.
a mandatory service or not as well.
Oh, okay. So we don't have to, if we wanted to withdraw, we wouldn't have to give 2 years' notice.
Yeah, it's not, that's, those kind of provisions are specific to the service, and this service is very, it has very minimal language on it.
However, if you were going to do a service review and make recommendations to the regional district board, one thing would be to be a little bit more specific about when you withdraw from the service and the mechanisms.
So my final comment, just so there's maybe a little more understanding, on our shared services, when we have a shared service with a regional district where the full area participates, and you tax on that, and if you look at the total sum amount of money that's raised, 2/3 of it comes from Area D. So I think that's the crux of some of the issue around some of these shared services, whether it's the library or any of these services, that every time you tax, that 2/3 of the revenue you're raising is coming from Area D, and there may be a perception that whether or not Area D is getting its just rewards or just mentioned. So part of what I think we do as we go through this is I think it'd be really productive or good if the village of Kaslo was a little bit more cognizant of that fact in the way that we promote and recognize and work our shared services. So if it's, say, the library, it's important that somehow that it's quite evident to our taxpayers that 2/3 of the money, so maybe it's even if it's if that's the way the service is named, it's Kaslo and Area D library service, or it's like with the fire department. We just went through a request from Andy Shadrach at the board meeting to have the fire department changed from the Kaslo volunteer fire department to indicate that the regional district is more involved. So I believe it's going to be Kaslo and Area volunteer fire department. So these are they seem like small things, but at the end of the day, if it comes down to a partner feeling unrecognized in the share of the service and how the service is funded, if that's causing issues, it becomes a relatively small thing for the village to be more aware and make sure that we, in our language and the way we operate, there's a little bit of a cultural thing around this, that we need to be a little bit more aware of kind of where the major funding is coming from. I think that would help.
Councillor Lang?
Yeah, just do we need a resolution or a recommendation to go to council to allow our director representative to take his concerns to this board meeting?
Or you can, well, basically, if you feel strongly about something, you provide a resolution of direction to the municipal director.
Right.
You essentially make it municipal policy on a particular matter.
Okay, so can we have that for our next regular council meeting? Can we craft a motion that would cover that up?
Yeah.
Because I think that's...
That would be a good idea. What that would do is that would put me in really good stead with my fellow directors,
Right.
who, yes, that would be a good thing.
Yeah, so it's not just, in my opinion, it's, council has instructed me to say
Correct.
ta-da-da-da-da, and respectfully, we would like to
Yeah.
request a service review, or however, whatever we're going to do, but just as a formal recommendation.
That would be an excellent thing. So can I second that open-ended, whatever you, Councilor Lang just said?
Birdsmithing is a nice strong suit.
So can I have you read back for what you got out of that? So I don't know exactly what I'm going to ask the vote on.
Okay, well, I'm going to say the CA Review Service 132 and make recommendations to council, and also provide with recommendations in the form of direction to the municipal director at the next RDCK board meeting.
Happy with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. What I would be interested in finding out is, since Director Shadrack has, a problem with the way it is it, what kind of things do other municipalities use their, this kind of service for? Like, what are the items that they're funding? There must be some basis for his not liking the service, like the way it's utilized by other communities.
He has been consistently challenged me to bring forward a proposal. So it's not that he's not interested in entertaining proposals. I think one of the main things that came up in my awareness around looking at this more closely, and also in his awareness, there's no limit. Typically a bylaw that's relatively restricted scope will have a limit in taxation, say 2 cents per thousand or something. This one,
It's wide open.
is wide open.
Okay.
Also, on the language that stipulates what it can be used for, it's probably even more wide open.
Oh, okay.
So there's some fear on the part of the director that basically it's so loose that just about anything potentially, and basically you've got 2 people that can flip it into to whatever. And I think he's quite concerned about that. That you get to with an election coming up, so I think he's quite motivated to either do his bit to withdraw Area D from it so that it ceases to be such an open-ended factor, or I think that's where he's more. He'll also be very interested in amendments because having a bylaw that's sitting there has no restrictions on how much you can tax for, has very loose restrictions on what you can use it for. I have to agree that it's not a good situation.
So I guess maybe we should also see what it actually reads like, because really I don't think, I've known until broadband has come up that such a thing actually existed. So we don't even know what the contents of the current bylaw are, and we're a part of that. So we, it's probably around here somewhere, but because it's never been utilized in the time that I've been on council, so we're not, we could have activated the use of it in prior years if there was something that was of benefit to both Castle and Area D, but we didn't know that the possibility existed.
I've read it, and I've studied it, and I was a very enthusiastic proponent of utilizing it. And then I believe it might have been the CAO Smith or somebody pointed out to me that it's fairly interesting that you need $10 million tax for it. It's a little bit
Too loose.
Yeah.
I don't want to speculate too much on the reasons for wanting to pull out, withdraw from the service now, but the weaknesses that I see as it stands, or in the financial area, is that if you go to all the bother of taxing for a service like that, you don't want it to be whittled away with 2,000 here, 5,000 there, just like a CBT grant program.
Yeah.
You want it to be monies that are held in reserve or are raised for significant economic development projects in the region. So it needs to be good, solid funds. The other is the old operational funding question. If it's construed that it could be used to operationally fund a third-party organisation, that usually scares politicians and elected politicians away as well, because again, it comes under pressure to be used for perhaps non-strategic purposes.
Right.
So that would be something that if you took out of if you made sure it couldn't happen,
Right.
you're left with these projects have to be meaningful projects. They have to do X, Y, and Z. I mean, there's still a degree of political judgment involved, but you do your best to have something that maybe mirrors what something like Southern Interior Development Trust does, because that would be the true value of it.
Yes.
something that could raise funds to be the match funding for an application to sit it for the province, not another 2 or 3 grand to non-profit X or Y.
Right. I guess another question would be is if one year we sought to activate that, and so it would be, that funding would be held at the regional district level, and then how does it actually get spent? Like, does it have to be by resolution of the entire board to authorize spending of that money? That's another question.
No, what'll happen is that of the new system that's being followed now, they're moving away from the commissions.
Right.
They're moving, you have the North
Yeah.
Kootenai Lake Services Committee,
Yes.
and that committee would meet and would be authorized to make expenditures within the guidelines of the given bylaw,
Yes.
within the budget of that committee,
Right.
and they would have the authority to expend those funds.
Okay.
And in the case of North Kootenai Lake Community Service Side, there'd be 2 people who voted on it. In the current system, what currently happens is maybe there's a commission, maybe there's not, but it goes to the regional district board. There would be a request to make an expenditure, and those 2 directors would vote on it at the table.
And just those 2 directors.
Yes.
Okay.
If there's only one director at the meeting,
Mhm.
or there's only one director in the service, then the full board has to vote.
Okay.
There is one question that I would love to research, and that is, I don't completely understand how the weighted votes work. Is that, and maybe not to distract Carol if we want to, but
Who's got more assessment usually?
it's assessment?
Yeah.
Well, in that case, I start to wonder if we're going to enter into a weighted vote situation potentially, because the assessments in the Area D are double what they are in Kaslo. So does that put us in a position of having a weighted vote between 2 directors? And that's a big conversation that
Right.
I don't think it's for now. But I'm curious.
So
to
we
understand
should be, in theory, given that, if there's a very strong regional district representative who wants a certain thing to happen, and there's no benefit to Kaslo at all, but because of a weighted vote, all the money could shoot to the regional district with minimal benefit to.
I'd like to understand that there. If there's only 2 members on a committee, can one person have a weighted vote? It doesn't make any sense. So,
No, it doesn't.
So-
So
Okay,
I-
so there's
that may be a-
definitely some questions that we need to get resolved and clear in our heads.
there needs to be a good solid review of the Service 142 to sort out some of these details. And I think this is part of the reason that the director has some hesitation about it.
Yeah. It's too bad that we're waiting until the last little bit in this term to look at something.
Well, I think he's always felt fairly comfortable that he had his hand on the tap and there was no money going, so he didn't care. And now he's fixed to exit. I think he wants to solve the tap.
Yeah. All right, so we were done with all our
Yes.
resolutions that we had on the table.
Yeah.
All right, anything else? Any other financial matters before, actually, didn't we move something to
Yes,
the
you
end?
did.
To just the in-camera item? So any other financial matters that we want to discuss before we move in camera?
Is the late edition in camera?
Mhm.
It is, okay.
Oh, no,
that's right.
that's
No, it
right.
wasn't. My apologies. No. Basically, I'm looking for your thoughts on this before the next council meeting, so that I can get moving with maybe some advertising. Because we're close to the period of not having an animal control officer, and I'm sure we will be without one for a little while. Following your direction at the camera meeting, I provided some suggested changes to the contract. Inclusion of bylaw 1070 as amended, which is animal attractants provisions. Also along in the area of payment, which is the major area of change, one of the major area of change. I'm suggesting, for at least for starting, for negotiation purposes, $900 plus applicable taxes per month. Payable in equally monthly installments, receipt of invoice, and being very clear there are no additional payments or rates for mileage or communications. The municipality will pay the animal control officer. I was looking for a percentage, it didn't give the whole thing away. You had 60% of all revenue collected for fines. Could move that back to 50 if you wish. In some other models I've seen it's been as high as 100. The municipality agrees that any fees collected for adoption, euthanasia, care fee will be paid to the animal control officer in the event that they ought to operate their own pound. I'm leaving the door open for the operation of a pound outside of the area that would be on a fee-for-service basis with the village as well, because there are options outside of the area that we can use. If they don't want to have a pound, that's entirely possible in this region. We can go another route, as long as we're clear that they don't get any compensation on those areas if we do go that route. Okay, moving to, if you go to Schedule A, which was the next part that I had some significant changes in, which general duties, that's page 7. I changed 1.3 to provide 10 hours of patrolling service in each month and operate on an on-call basis to respond to complaints and emergencies expeditiously as required. That's down from the 30, which I think was part of a problem with the previous contract. It leaves an expectation of some patrolling every month without making it look like it's the be-all and end-all of the animal control officer's activities. Next, 1.6, provide all the equipment necessary for impounding and transporting dogs to the designated pound, be that their own pound operation or an improved external arrangement. To be directly available to the general public by way of a public email address or telephone number as prepared. I'll leave that open. 1.9, to arrange external or own temporary coverage in the event of absence or vacation without engaging in any subcontracts. They have the option, if say they have an employee of their own. One way I'm proposing to advertise this is suggesting that it's a good opportunity for someone who's already a contractor with general liability insurance. Because that general liability insurance is good for any number of contractor activities. So someone who already has a truck, already has general liability insurance, is a pretty good shoe-in if they're interested in being the animal control officer. They can keep their business costs down. So if they have someone that works with them under their company name, they can do that. If we have to arrange an external person as coverage, if they're on holiday or not available, I've had an interesting discussion with the contractor who works for the regional district, and she's based in Blewett. She would bring, at least until provisionally, suggest that she might be interested in fee-for-service coverage of interim or vacancies and that sort of thing. Quite a knowledgeable individual. So there are options to do that, to plug the gaps. So those are the those are largely the areas that I've changed, and if that's all right with you, I'd quite like to get cracking with some advertising, so that in the next week or so that we can see if there's interest in the community.
This doesn't have to go to council, does it?
No, I can advertise without going to council, but basically when it comes to negotiating the final contract with someone who's interested, it'll come back to you.
Okay. Well,
The only thing that I was wondering is, we're calling them an animal control officer, but all through this, all we refer to as dogs. Should we, like, is that all they're,
we don't have...
Call them cats.
Interestingly, the town of Port McNeill went through this just after I arrived there, and they created a cat bylaw and requirement for cat licenses. Yes, I suppose there were the odd occasions where cats got impounded and rehomed and that sort of thing. We're not set up for anything other than dogs, unfortunately. But when it comes to the animal attractant bylaw, if they, it wouldn't be too much on them to at least enable them to issue tickets for things like activities that bring deer in or cause a problem.
Should that be mentioned in here, that part of the expectation is they enforce the animal attractant bylaw?
It's listed in there as 1070,
Okay.
so I've added that in already. That will require a little bit of work because I've got to work on that bylaw anyway this year. But as long as I'm clear with any applicants that would be part of the expectation, it should be all right.
All right, so Councillor Holland?
Does it make any sense to have some sort of guidelines around how quickly they're expected to respond to a complaint? So,
That's a tough one because in the discussion I had with the other animal control officer, it was clear that if you're going to be in this line of work and doing it well, you have to be able to respond quickly. It's less about patrolling and more about responding quickly to anything that's going on. So it's not recommended that there be someone who's hard to get a hold of or who's got a lot of other stuff going on, which might be, given the level of remuneration we can provide, it'll be tough. But there should be expectations. I have put a provision in there about municipal staff, however, we're stuck with that because we're currently not set up to be temporary borders for dogs while we're waiting on the animal control officer, and there was a degree of confusion over that in the year I've been here. We get dogs brought over, we're asked to hold on to them and so on. Shopkeepers will bring them into their stores, and with the expectation that municipal staff will go through to take the animal away. That's not. It's under that local conditions area. Here we are. Municipal number 26. Municipal employees do not handle or accept surrendered, lost or captured animals in the absence of the animal control officer, as there are no in-house provisions for temporary kenneling or related standard operating guidelines for staff. That's currently the case. If you wanted that situation to change, we would need to have some discussions with Public Works. It would probably only happen once in a blue moon, but we still need to have that discussion with Public Works.
so I guess I'm still wondering if it's reasonable to put a guideline or condition in here that complaints are responded to within 2 or 4 hours or something like that. I don't know.
I can put it in.
It says expeditiously as required. And let's face it, you're only going to get complaints when the office is open. I mean, it's not likely going to be a 9 or 10 o'clock at night type of situation, I wouldn't think.
Well, if he publishes his phone number,
People can call him at that time of night.
And do we expect him to show up within 4 hours if it's 11 o'clock at night?
Yeah.
And realistically, when you're only asking them to do 10 hours a month, how motivated is anyone going to be? Like, they could, in a single call, use their 10 hours. It depends what they have to do with the animal. Right? If it has to go into Nelson to the pound, you know, it can take. So
that's my concern is that some kind of guidelines or expectation for responding. You know, if you just sit and take the message on your phone and go, yeah, you know, I'll keep an eye out for it.
One thing I will mention, I have to be careful on camera about it. Our one experience over the winter with the Nelson area pound was very positive. There are costs, of course, but they have a good relationship with the SPCA and Nelson, so the transition from the pound to the SPCA was was seamless. So as long as we're clear with the new ACO that they impound, they take it to Nelson, to the designated location, that should work fine if they don't want to run their own pound. Running your own pound locally is a bit of a risk.
Okay.
But my point was that it's not enough hours and compensation for them to be basically at our beck and call. That, you know, they're going to be having other employment in order to make ends meet. So it's pretty tough to put on any really strict specifications on response times, because you're just paying them, you know, we can't afford to pay them a full living wage off of this position. So, you know, hopefully it'll be someone who loves animals, and they'll, you know, want to respond as quickly as they can.
So is what the 10 hours stated in there, is that saying that
Yes.
Well, that's a reduction from the 30 that was in there at the last
we, but I mean,
contract.
it's not a maximum 10 hours or?
Well, it just says 10, I would say, but it is a minimum of 10 hours?
Minimum.
Yeah, I could put a minimum on
Yeah.
it.
Just trying to find it real quick.
But it was a straight 10 hours.
It was simply to avoid any confusion that our expectation of the ACO is that they spend their month driving around, burning up a lot of fuel.
Yeah.
Well, it's 1.3 under Schedule A. So, where were we at? So, do we have a motion on the table, or was it just a
No,
discussion?
it was simply if there were any changes you wanted before I post, because if I'm asked for a draft of this, I want something that's close to what will actually be presented.
Over there.
Okay.
Say, Greg. Was that Greg?
Yeah, he was just.
Did he switch it off?
Yeah.
So can I have a motion to move in camera once Greg has the camera off?